Yeah, good morning, everybody. Jamie Wallace here with with our lesson 6 Q&A Zoom meeting, and we're going to take a look at that lesson and answer any questions and just kind of give it an overview, as well as looking at any other questions that might be coming up in people's world regarding their design process or what have you. So yeah, let us take a look at the assignment. We're just going to share screen here. Here we go. All right. So yeah, lesson 6 is a nice bit of contrast to to lesson 5. Lesson 5 was definitely tricky, but this one is much more straightforward, and it's all about soil. And I'm going to add a little bit to it after I go through the assignment itself. But basically what we're going to do is look up on the Web Soil Survey your project site location, and we end up taking a screenshot of that map and include it in our template file, our presentation. And basically what we're going to do beyond that is take a soil test, a jar test, and then compare it to the map. So what you'll probably find with the USDA Soil Survey Map is quite incredible. Just check to see if I can open this here. So this is, it can be a little bit confusing, and there are some good helpful little tutorials here for the Web Soil Survey video link here, because if you're not used to this website, you might, it might throw you off a little bit. But we're going to take a quick peek at that. So this is the landing page, and you basically want to hit the green button here, and you have to establish an area of interest. So does anybody on the call here want to throw their address into the chat, and we can use that as our example? If not, I can just zoom in on any old spot. But this might be a little more useful. There we go, Jennifer. We will copy that. So the first thing we want to do is get this area of interest. So if I'm not mistaken, there we go. So it looks like we're right in this area here. So at this point, what you have to do is tell it how much of the space you want it to map. So I just go up to the define AOI, and we're just going to draw a rectangle, and that shows us the area of interest. And then if you're good with that, you're going to want to go to the next step here, which is the actual soil map. And it'll show us the location, and there's different soil types in the area of interest, but it looks like there's just one for the project site, and that would be this Amethyst silty loam. So here's all the information we get from that. So we want to definitely copy this over into our template file, and it is telling us basically we're looking at silty loam, which it could well be. Now, the one thing that you'll probably find in these urban spaces is that there's a lot of sand importation during construction of homes and all the infrastructure. So quite often we'll see sandy loam in a lot of these locations. So, but it is interesting just to go through here. And again, it gives you quite a bit of information that you might find really interesting, and that typical profile and the depth to water. So it says here we're 6 to 18 inches, which is unlikely, given it's an urban space and this would all have been drained. But this is our sort of starting point. And if we look at our template file and we go to our first sheet here, this is where we want to paste all that information into. And then we're going to reference that when we get to the third part of the assignment. So the next part is where we do our soil jar tests. And this is where we're going to include the base plan, as well as some indications where those testing spaces have done. This is a good example here. And we're also looking at what microclimates those are within. And let's see here. We will just go back to our assignment and take a peek. So that's the mapping. It's pretty straightforward. And again, you have a good tutorial here if you do get stuck. But most of what I've just shown you there should get you the information you need. And you can actually go a little bit deeper into this, into that site. It's a very useful resource here. So we won't do that today, but there's a lot more within that.
Recording in progress.
Uh-oh. I just heard something. I'm not sure if somehow I got my recording turned off. Nope. Okay. All right. Let's see. So next is our soil testing. So this is more sort of hands-on fun stuff. And what we do have some instructional videos here. And it's pretty simple. You're gonna, easiest thing to do is to take a mason jar or a series of mason jars and take a look at the link here, all the instructions, because really we want you to dig a hole that's about 1 foot deep, and it'll probably be 1 foot wide. And then we want you to go through and do a couple little tests here on soil texture by feel, as well as a jar test. So the jar test, as you can see, put probably 1/3 of the jar is soil. And then you're going to add water, quite a bit of water, and you're going to shake that up and then just leave the jar for, at least a couple of days. Depending on the type of soil you have, will depend on how long you have to leave the jar to settle out. You'll see this number 3 on the end here. It has a lot more clay, and these are quite easy to read, even if we look at this picture here. So sand is the heaviest material of these 3 parts. So that tends to settle out first, and that's what's in the bottom of the jar. And then we're going to have our silt layer, which is the next heaviest. And then the very, very top here is going to be clay. So this here is just a very small amount, and that's what's still suspended in the jar. So that still has to settle out, and that could take a week. It may take less, and even if you get to this point and it's still cloudy, that's not a big deal. It's not going to add that much material when it settles out. So you can certainly go ahead and and do your work with your jar looking like this. Now, the tricky part here is getting a picture that is clear. So the one thing you want to consider doing is try and shine some light on your jar from where your camera is. That way I can see what different levels are here. That's not always the case. It can be a little bit tricky. Let's see if there's any samples. Yeah, so that's not too bad. You can see there's quite a bit of clay here on this top portion. That'd be the clay layer. And up here, you might think, oh, what's that? And that would be organic matter that's just floating. So we don't count that in this. We're looking at clay, silt, and sand components. We're not looking at any organic material at all. Well, even though that is very important. And as we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go. Here's another example, and you can see here, this gets harder to start reading. So that's probably what you'll find is the most challenging part of the whole assignment, is getting a good picture of your jar. Yeah, and this would have sat for quite a while to have all that material settle out. And then another important part of the assignment is showing us that it's a foot deep. That's a good thing. And seeing what is going on at the side of the hole is also really good information for yourself. You can see there's a fair root depth here with this turf grass. And then there are some other roots a little lower down. That's a great thing to see. And then we're going to do a percolation test where we fill the hole with water and we time how long that's going to drain. And given it's summer, or so-called, certainly where I am, it hasn't really gotten going yet. The weather, the heat anyways. If you find the hole's really dry, you can do one sort of trial run and wait for it to empty, and then time it on the second go. If you are in this loam, sandy loam arena, you'll probably find that this drains very quickly. Where I live, if we do a soil test, which we have like this, the hole empty in 10 minutes. It's just very, very rapid infiltration, which is great during the summer, or sorry, during the winter. And then it's a little more challenging at this time of year because we want to try and slow that down. So yeah, those are a couple of tips. And then identifying how the texture feels. So that can be a helpful exercise to go through, and does sort of verify our jar test, or it can. So if it's a heavy clay soil, it's going to be really sticky, and it'll roll out into a ribbon quite easily. So again, there's lots of instructional videos here just to take you through that. And again, it's pretty straightforward. So I don't think there's anything mysterious there. Does anybody have any questions at all about this so far? Happy to answer those. And like I say, there are lots of videos to help you along here. So one thing we will look at, let's just take a look at the texture map. We'll get a nice picture here. Aha, Jennifer's got a question. We will just bring that out. Okay, should we actively pick 3 distinct microclimates for the soil test? Well, you can do that. If it was me, I would be picking places that either have, let's say you've got a vegetable garden, you want to check out what that is looking like in terms of its soil structure, or say you have a place you're planning to put a new garden in, that might be a good idea just to see what the structure is there. If you have any thoughts about rain gardens in your design, excuse me, that would be a good idea just to see what the soils are like. So if that was the case, if you're saying, hey, I want to do a rain garden with some of the water coming off my roof, and you ended up doing a sample and you found it was quite a bit of clay in there, that would tell you that, most likely you're going to have a challenge making that rain garden function really well with those heavy soils. So it's a very informative test. So that's how I would approach it, Jennifer, is you can do distinct microclimates, but I think it's more important to either sort of assess where you are growing. Maybe your garden isn't performing the way you think it should, and this test would help identify the texture, but it also might help identify some compaction that would appear during the infiltration test. So let's say you had some compaction in your soil and you had sandy loam, a very free draining material, but during the water or the infiltration test, it was very, very slow. That tells you that you've got, most likely you have some compaction issues. So yeah, I would choose it based on those points that I've made. So Marina has a question here. How do we choose a spot? Yeah, I believe, Marina, if I'm not mistaken, we're asking you to do 3 soil tests. Now, this may have changed. Yeah, there we go. So you're going to take 3. Now, if you have a very large site, 3 is not a lot, but it is a good start. And again, I think I've answered the first part of your question there on how to choose it. If you were on acreage, I might think about if you had some pasture, whether it be performing really well or maybe not. That might be an idea. So often, and we're going to talk about another type of soil test after we get through this that I think is, even more important. And it's going to be integrated into the course eventually. And then Jennifer, so consider zone design ideas. Okay, yeah. There you go. So, we have a similar thing going on with our annual vegetable garden. We have 50-foot rows that are 30 inches wide, and one end is not performing well, but we have already figured out what that is, and it's really got nothing to do with the soil, but we've discovered that we have forests surrounding the area, and we're getting a lot of root infiltration from Douglas fir and other trees that are there. So we are sort of a no-till approach to our vegetables. So we don't turn over beds. We just add compost each year before we're seeding or planting. And the downside of that is this root infiltration from surrounding trees. Now, we do broad fork, and I don't know if I've talked to anybody about broad forks yet, but they are fantastic. Let me show you what we have. We have a meadow creature, which, there we go, looks very much like this. And these are great. So the beauty of this tool is it will decompact lower down, but these are 14-inch tines, so you can get 14 inches down. and it decompacts that without disturbing the surface. We're not flipping the soil over, which is really, I'll say cataclysmic in a lot of ways to soils. You know, this personal opinion, I like to try and avoid that. But let us take a look at some other stuff here. Yeah, the big thing for me when we get to soils, funny enough, when we do our design projects, I don't often worry about soil texture for a couple of reasons. Well, one is most of our soil textures are very similar in the area that I live. If we get into sort of a valley pasture situation, it'll change. But for the most part, we're a very gravelly, sandy loam. But the big thing that I focus on is actually the soil food web. And this is an image. And here, I'll just put that link in the chat if anybody wants to take a look at it. And basically, it is all about what is alive in the soil below and above ground, predominantly below ground. And you can see how organic matter, plant roots, bacteria, fungi, and nematodes, these are just kind of very general groups of organisms. They work in conjunction with all of this to create plant available nutrients. So believe it or not, then it's a little bit tricky. When I was first starting out in the landscape, I was really lucky. I was working with people that used a lot of organic material, no synthetic fertilizers. So we would build beds for plantings, and they performed really well. And that's something I took away from my younger years and have always applied. And so what it is when we put compost on a garden, whether it's on the surface or some people like to mix it in, which I don't advocate that, mainly because I like the compost to be doing multiple duties, and one is sort of capping off and protecting that soil from evaporation and weed germination and other things. But the compost on its own is not going to do anything for your plants. It will not provide any food for the plants. The plants can't access generally speaking, the nutrition or the available nutrients coming off your compost. So we need the soil food web to do that, and that is all these microorganisms that consume, die, or they're consumed by others. And a good example of that is worms, right? Worms go through compost and they consume the compost, and they actually crush it inside. They have a band on their body, and that band is a muscle, and it contracts and crushes the material and basically liquefies not all, but a lot of the organisms within the compost that they've ingested. So you need the soil food web to drive your landscape. So that for me is one of the most important things. If you don't support the soil with compost, that's kind of the starting point. Then you're going to find you're struggling, and that's why people inherently will turn to synthetic fertilizer for help. They think, oh, my soil's not nutritious, it's not doing what it should be. And often the case is that there's nothing wrong with the soil. Even pure sand has a lot of nutrition within it. It's just getting that extracted from from that, and it takes organic matter and soil organisms. So again, it's not part of the course. It's going to be in the future, and this is something that Dr. Elaine Ingham put together. I took some courses from her. I was going to be going to go down that soil food web consultancy road, and I decided I didn't want to. But very, very interesting work that she's done. And, you know, some of you may enjoy the courses that she offers. Some of you may enjoy just some of the free videos that are up here, but it's pretty amazing. Some of the work that I've seen her involved with, and that whole approach just really resonates. So I'll not go on about that anymore. So yeah, here's our 3 different slides showing the different tests, and we're going to indicate on our soil triangle what those are, and that's really quite easy. We'll just get my pen going here. There we go. So if we took a jar test and let's say we had 20% clay, so we'd start here and kind of draw an imaginary line down. And then let's say the silt was, I don't know, 50%. And we would draw that across here. And then of course our sand would be 20%. And then we draw the line up here. So you can see that where, I haven't done this very well, but where all these will intersect, well, they won't intersect there. It's 30. There we go. We're in that clay situation. So pretty easy to figure out where you should be on the triangle. And then there's 2 different colors here. One is for the jar test and one is for the ribbon feel, you know, the feel of that, where you think that should be. And, you know, honestly, if you don't want to do that, it doesn't really matter to me. The jar test is the big part. And then we want to have some images here. So of you doing that field test, the percolation test, and a picture of the hole with a tape measure in it. So this sort of thing here, and that's great. So it's a couple pictures, some notes, right? And with your percolation, you want to basically say how quickly it's draining. It might be 10 inches per hour. It could be 10 inches in 15 minutes. As you'll see, they'll all be the same, or sorry, they'll all be different. And all of your tests may be a little bit different too. The soils may be slightly different. So it's a very interesting thing to go through. And again, we're going to do 3 of those. And then we're going to look at some of the limiting factors that you've identified. So if your soil's draining slowly, it may be compaction. You may have discovered that when you were digging the hole, it was really hard, very hard to dig, right? Or you may discover it's really fluffy and comes out very easy and is full of worms and roots. And, you know, the more life you see in there, that's going to tell you a lot. And then we want you to compare your jar test to the map, right? The USDA map, and then some of your goals. So based on your test, what are some of the goals for continuing to build more soil on your project site? And some of those might be aeration, applying compost annually. You know, if you're in a let's say you have a permanent planting of trees and shrubs and perennials, you know, that's typically going to be an annual application of compost, right? If you have a vegetable garden, that might be a little bit different. You may be broad forking and applying compost. We used to do compost as well as a cover crop, a really quick cover crop, like that's easy to get rid of. Buckwheat, love buckwheat. That's one example. Winter field peas. We put those on during the off season, and both of those are very easy to kill when you've had enough of them. So in some ways, it really depends on the conditions of your soil. So if you have a new vegetable garden, you'll probably find you have to really focus on building, not so much building the soil, but building the soil organisms to get more fertility from it. Whereas if you have an older garden, like we have beds where I live that are 28 years old, and they're just fine. They benefit from annual mulching, but they don't need anything radically done to them because they've got a really good cycle of growth in them already. So yeah, this is good to consider. And then we go to a SWOT analysis, and then any questions or feedback you have there. So again, it's pretty straightforward. I don't know if anybody has any questions at all. I guess one thing I would ask with your project sites, whether any of you have identified spaces within your project sites that maybe aren't performing the way you think they should. So has anybody seen that? You walked around your project site and thought, wow, that's, either the grass is not growing, or, the plants I put in are just kind of sitting there. And that's not always a straightforward answer as to why, but it does, you do start to narrow in on any of these the reasons for that, just in terms of the soil. That's a good place to start. But so Jennifer has a raised bed, a raised area from a mature hedge, has lots of roots. Yeah. So I gather that's a cedar hedge. Yeah, my experience with cedar hedges, wow, they're quite incredible. They will basically suck the life out of everything around it. Western red cedar is a beautiful tree and needs lots of moisture to be happy. But it is surface rooting. It's very difficult to work around. So hedges can be really tricky to grow up against. I've run into that a few times. If you're planting a new hedge and you're planting some sort of garden in front of it, it's fairly easy. It'll become established before you get a lot of root infiltration. But if you have an old hedge, it can be tricky. So yeah, when you do your jar test there, Jennifer, I bet you're going through a lot of root. Yeah. Does anybody else have any spots in their landscape that they have noticed? Any larger properties, maybe some pasture isn't performing the way you think it should, or maybe it has some weed activity. The same with any ornamental beds. Sometimes the lack of soil health is indicated with the type of weed germination that we see. Yeah, well, if anybody has any thoughts about that, feel free to pop them in the chat. And we don't need to go over that. We have done so. So yeah, Broad Fork is your friend. And one thing I'll show you that we purchased years ago, Just trying to move my windows here. There we go. What's called a penetrometer, and very hard to get in Canada here, but this is a brand that's made in the US. It's very, very simple. And all it is a rod with 3-inch increments notched on the side of the rod. And at the top, you have a couple of handles, and you have a gauge, and you have 2 different tips that you can use. You can see here there's and depending on the soils you have, you can adjust the tips, but you basically just push this into the ground, and the resistance is shown here on the meter. And then I believe on this, this line here is 200 PSI. But with my work with or the coursework I went through with Dr. Ingham, her magic number was 150, which is right there. So we push this in the ground, and if it hits 150, we know that most plant roots will not push through that. So we need to take a look at the depth that compaction is happening, and whether we can do anything about it. So on broad acreage, it's pretty easy. We can use a keyline plow, and these are brilliant, and they do a great job, very quick, and you can just see that they don't, minimal disturbance on the surface, and some will have a roller on the back, so you're cutting, but the roller pushes the turf back down, so that if you're running animals out here shortly afterwards, you're not worrying about any hazards. And we don't really care if this seals up. This is doing some it's kind of like a subsoiler, but better. It's going to break up the compaction below the ground without disturbing the surface. So one of the most amazing things I learned in that courses I took was that typical topsoil, we get a full air exchange every hour. So what does that mean? If we look, okay, I see Kelvin's got a question. I'll get to that right in a second here. If we look at this profile, and we typically have an organic layer and then topsoil, then we get into the subsoil. But in this top arena here, where we have all our rooting, we get a full air exchange once an hour. So you can see, if we had compaction, how deadly in a lot of ways that can be, because all of the roots from whatever plants we're growing need to be oxygenated. The organisms that habitat, that are living in the soil, they need oxygen. So when that gets reduced through compaction, you end up encouraging different organisms, and they're anaerobic organisms, and those are not typically desirable or what we want. Yeah, so one thing we do in terms of soil test each time we are on a project is we'll run a soil food web test. So here's a bunch of labs that are throughout North America, and it's a very low cost, simple test. and you end up sending it, you contact the firm, they'll give you instructions, you send in a sample, and they will look at that sample, and they don't look at the sand silt clay, they look at the organisms that are alive within the sample, as well as what you're trying to grow. If you have a pasture you're trying to improve, they'll indicate what should be there and how to leverage what you're doing in order to encourage those organisms. So if let's say you have a pasture not performing, you do a soil food web test, and they say, well, there's obviously a whole bunch of compaction here because the organisms in your sample are anaerobic. So they're organisms that don't need a lot of oxygen. And they typically do not promote good plant health. So that's sort of the route we go. We definitely lean towards this sort of testing on projects. But that's just what we're doing, and it's I'm not suggesting that's what you do. We're just trying to give you a bit of an overview of how we approach it. So Calvin's got a question here. You're somewhat limited where you can dig 3 holes because the ground is so compacted. Well, there you go. You jump on your shovel. Yeah. So sounds like you've had lots of disturbance, Calvin. I don't remember your project site off the top of my head, but yeah, that can happen when there's disturbance or overgrazing or that sort of thing going on. Oh, it's suburban. Okay. But even then, suburban, you're going to have disturbance, right? So it's like where I live. I'm on 5 acres here, and it used to be full of old growth trees, and now it's not. So it's that change. During that change, we can really cause some challenges to the soil itself. Also, large areas that have been covered by thick weed. Oh, geez. Yeah, that's the fabric they use for weed suppression is something you want to always steer away from. So Calvin, you may have to try and remove that. That would be my advice, and that might require a little excavator. It's nasty work for sure. Yeah, it's going to be a big job. Yeah. Yeah, the only thing you can do there is get rid of that material because it will persist forever. Yeah. Well, everybody's got to start somewhere. And if you're finding there's very little soil life, this all sort of plays into what you're talking about, that it's so compacted, you can barely get a shovel in the ground, and you're not finding much in the way of roots or soil life. So if you can somehow remove that material, that would be step one. And that's not a fun job because it will typically have a lot of root material on top of it. But yeah, it's nasty stuff. I don't know whoever suggested using it, but it's not a good thing. We want that whole soil profile to be breathing. And you might want to invest in a broad fork, Calvin. That's depends on the amount of area that you're talking about, whether it's multiple acres that are the same, or whether it's a smaller garden area that's maybe it's a lawn area. I don't know, but yeah. Well, all the upside to this is pretty much anything you do is going to improve the situation, and you'll see a big response. So it's a 1/4 acre. Oh yeah. Well, the worst case scenario is getting a mini excavator in there and using it to basically just start to break up the material, So that's a tough spot to be in. Quarter acre is not too bad, but yeah. Well, any other information you have, Calvin, as we go through the course, if you want to post some photos, and be interesting to see your jar test results and some images from that. That'll help a lot. So you may find that your site is predominantly subsoil. That could be, right? Somebody has scraped out all the good stuff, and that often happens when lots get cleared for building. But yeah, I just need a little bit more info, give you any more comments on that. But yeah, you got a little bit of work ahead of you in terms of I found some concrete. Yeah, it's quite amazing what some people will do. And you can rent, although I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. You can rent a mini excavator yourself and run it, but if you've never done that before, it takes probably 1,000 hours of operation to really get a good handle on it. So it's something that, and I used to have an excavator. I don't anymore, but whenever we need one, I actually call somebody, and a friend that we've worked with for years, and I prefer that somebody else does it. But yeah, that can be a big challenge. So is if you can get your soils pointing in the right direction, you're going to see that you're going to have a lot better results. But yeah, sometimes we never know what we're starting with. The good side is there are some areas on the coast in Washington that have arsenic issues, and they have fallout from industrial activities. So quite often everybody has some set of challenges, but it sounds like you've got a few there. But you'd probably be quite amazed at the transition that can occur just with a little bit of manual decompaction, and that again might have to get pretty aggressive. If you can't get a broad fork in there, you'd have to get a little compact excavator. So probably not what you want to hear. But yeah, we've had lots of, see, typically where I live, what we'll do, and maybe I can get a couple pictures here for everybody to look at. I'll stop share a second and just see if I can get some. Yeah, I'll share a couple of project images here. All right. Let's see here. Well, this is a project we did a few years ago. I'm just trying to, there's a good indication of soils that are in my area. And you can see there's some decent soil up against this growing area, but this is very typical. So typically what we'll do is we will come in, and let's say the slope is a good example. We wanted to retain at the bottom of the slope, and this, we want to plant this. So what we do is we'll strip this turf. I'm not sure if, yeah, we're starting to see it here. We'll strip the turf because this is where all the life is. And then we hold on to that. We will keep the turf. We put some rock at the bottom to retain and reduce the slope. And then we put the turf back on top. And what we do is we go through here and we flip all these little pieces upside down so the roots are sticking up. And then we come in and we'll add topsoil. So this is one machine that we'll use, and it's a slinger truck, and it just slings all the soil into place for us. And then here we put as much soil as we can, and these are all sort of rough images, but we're going after a foot and a half in here, and obviously we have irrigation that we've done before we put soil in. So we kind of have this sequence, but excavation and trying to and importing is often something we have to do in urban areas. And it's just like this planting behind the wall here. I don't know if I have any good after photos. There's one. So this is the first year after planting, and it's quite early in the season. This would have been, this is February. Yeah. So we have cardoon and all kinds of stuff in here. Creates a little bit of a barrier for our clients during the summer. They can sit up here in some privacy, and then the rest of the year, it's very dynamic. So this is changing season to season. There's no woody plants at all along here. It's all herbaceous or ornamental grasses. And then we did a little lawn alternative. It's not turf grass. We got clover. We have a number of different things in here. So yeah, but removal and replenishing that soil is something that we often have to do. Same with this rain garden we did. We had to excavate out material and build up with that. And you can see this lawn alternative just starting to germinate here. So yeah, so it makes it way more expensive. There's no doubt of that. But you know, some of the projects that we get involved with, people want these things to happen quickly. They're not. This is right after planting, so we mulch after that. But you can see the size of this cardoon here versus a little bit later. Right, so that was less than a year later, and things rocket because of the high quality compost that we're using here. The soil that we bring in, even though it looked good, it's basically devoid of all life, and you have to add really good compost to jumpstart it. It won't do much on its own. So, all right. Well, we've got a few minutes left here. Just as a quick question for people, does anybody other than Calvin, because Calvin's certainly identified a lot of challenges on his site, his project site. With anybody on the call here, are there any challenges that you can kind of foresee before you do your jar test, just by observing of what you've observed, like problem areas or wet areas or areas that are, you know, have a huge amount of growth going on, which would be, you know, a good thing to see? Is there anything that sort of jumps out at anybody? You know, reasons for testing. Perhaps you do have an underperforming area that that's working or isn't working. Yeah, if you have any thoughts on that, you just drop it in the chat there. And just a heads up too, I noticed with lesson 5, I didn't get around to marking everybody's assignments, so I'll do that this week for sure. I had another class going on at the same time, and it was their final week. So they have their final designs put in. So we definitely get to those. So Jennifer says that you've amended your soil and you're trying to get rid of some grassy spots. You're worried that we added too much sandy soil. Right. Right. Okay. And Marina, they have a few areas on the site that have issues with drainage. Yeah, so you may find that you are finding clay, that could be, and you also may find that it's just compaction. So when you go to do a jar test or dig a hole there, might be what Calvin has encountered, where it's very, very hard digging, and that's the main issue rather than the soil texture, because that texture, funny enough, no matter what you have, yeah, it will be interesting for sure. It, regardless of where your soils land on that texture triangle, you can get them to behave like loam. So if you have pure sand, pure clay, it's all, you can amend it. And the amending is basically the same. We're wanting to increase the amount of organic matter within the soil. And why is that? Well, organic matter, you can look at as, condominiums for condos for soil organisms. That's where they live. That's where they eat and propagate. And that's the material that's going to allow them to have the best life. And if they are having a great life, your garden's gonna as well. So, okay. Well, we're right at the top of the hour here, so some good comments from everybody, and really looking forward to seeing your jar test next week. So if there's any other questions, now's the time. If not, we will end our meeting here. And again, I look forward to and one thing you're going to notice, there has been some changes to the Canvas website. So all the instructors just found this out a couple of days ago. So you might find it looks a little bit different. And there is some tutorial, there are some instructions about that when you log in. So be aware of that. And there'll probably be some help being offered from our end just to clarify anything. I know it's not great timing. We had no idea they were doing this. So yeah. So anyways, everybody have a great week, and thank you very much for all the excellent questions, and we'll look forward to seeing your assignments. So everybody take care.